second session. I should do something, which is that. So it was the second session about philosophy of culture. So I was in between not the last session, but the previous one and the last session. I was in the middle of a historical survey. And so I had mentioned already hermeneutics and dialectics. And last time I presented Marx's vision of culture, tried to explain how Frankfurt School had at the same time took it up and also shifted it. So, and I insisted on the point that Frankfurt School considers criticism as a fundamental for philosophy of culture. A good philosophy of culture has to be critical, has to be able to be critical. And I explained why Lyotard disagreed with such approach, because for him, the feature which was kept by Frankfurt School after Marx was the feature of defining a central contradiction and deriving everything in culture from this central contradiction. And Lyotard saw that if we proceed that way, we are going to erase heterogeneity of culture. And Lyotard is very clear about the fact that he wants a philosophy of culture picturing the local standards and their irreducibility. So, sorry. No, yes, okay. So then I defined a problematic, which is that we have to see to each district, we have to associate to each district of culture a local meaning, and we have to try to think heterogeneity by basing ourselves on these local meaning. So, but in order to do that, we have to know better how we conceive meaning in general. So I said in the last session that we inherited the referential intentional conception of meaning, which has been sustained both by Frege and Husserl. And it takes meaning to be the presentation mode of beings in Frege or objects in Husserl. Meaning is viewed as functional over the objects, the meaning of which it spells out, and also it's finalized towards them, because this presentation mode is about presenting something. It's about the object which is going to be presented. So I suggested that we may consider meaning in a completely different way. If we follow Levinas, we are going to consider meaning in the line of address. So meaning, we grasp it now at the level of the way we relaunch a message having reached us and demanding us. So the basic circumstance is the circumstance of this incoming message, which addresses me. And this notion of an incoming message which addresses me, it unfolds the idea that this message asks something to me. It asks me to relaunch it in a faithful way. And that's the issue we have in every conversation. In every conversation, we are trying to answer in such a way that what we are going to utter is answering to the incoming content we received. And I remember that when I was using the first program, doing the job of which Turing defined in his famous paper, it was ELIZA, which was written in Lisp. One had the strong feeling that in many cases, the program was not answering to the content we had delivered to it. So I think it's also a very relevant condition for dialogue, simply.
I'm wondering, like, also, like, we have a lot of debates about fake news and fact checking.
Yeah.
And like now what you're saying, I find this interesting, right? Because I always thought it was strange that people believed, I mean, I'm not saying that fact checking is maybe not important, but what I thought was strange that people thought fact checking is going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
I always wondered why. Now, like, kind of, I can say what they are missing, right? So they are missing that meaning. They were thinking in this referential/intentional theory of meaning, and then fact checking. Yeah, it makes some sense, but it's like the reason why we have all these problems in the public discussion is more closely related to about the third theory of meaning that you're presenting. And if you want to understand the problems, we should probably think about this.
Yeah, so there is the problem which is usually described that fake news, they are portraying the world in the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly.
But there is also the other problem is that we are reading messages forgetting completely of what the messages asks from us. We very often we are seeing in any message we received only a small part which is relevant for our agonistic against the message, and we don't truly react by trying to be faithful to what is asked in the message. And I also thought the same to make it even more academic. When I was standing in the commission of dissertations, I had the feeling that my colleagues, most of the time, they didn't react to what the student had, as a matter of fact, written. They were not interested. They were only looking for the point where they can disagree, for example, or the point where the student has said something wrong, or anything of that kind. But I think our first task is to understand what this message was going to, and what it asked us to understand as a demeanor.
Also, another comment to current politics in the US is that there's a lot of debate about critical race theory, so which is
cancel culture.
Critical theory, right? And so now from what you're saying, is kind of interesting that those who criticize critical theory are themselves kind of captured in the same misconception, right? And they also, it's related to what you said, Lyotard said, that this attitude is kind of erasing heterogeneity, right? And so I think it's really interesting what you're saying, because we can just try to apply your ideas to current
we could try
situations and just see.
From what I know, I don't know how it's exactly how the US situation is, but it's extremely complex.
Yeah, but there
are a lot of discourses, and each of them, many of them are wrong in a different way. From what I feel, at least.
Yeah. I like that.
So here, meaning in this address conception is functional over how we have been reached, and it's finalized towards the demand which is involved in this message, in this incoming message. Because the whole stakes are to relaunch in a faithful way. So then I came to expound the new kind of philosophical inquiry I have tried and defined, which I name Etho Analysis. And so I had to introduce you to my vocabulary, which involves sollicitators, built on the solicitate, on the verb solicitate. It doesn't exist in my small English dictionary, but I think it must exist in a larger thing. Ethoses and senses. So what does it mean to share a sense if we follow the address conception? It means that we are co-requested with others. To share means that something is incoming on all of us, and so we are sharing this request, incoming request. It means that we receive calls. And how do we receive calls? We receive calls through the shared language. So everything presupposes that there is a linguistic community. And so some words of this shared language, they unfold more than any extensional reading may capture. They convey a call. And these are the words I call solicitators. So I gave the example of love because I think that to read love as an extensional word, to read love as referring to love episodes or love objects, we feel that it's not enough. Love is almost at least as much used in order to express the disruption introducing a new atmosphere. And I used Phil Connings. Love is, we understand how love works in our language by listening to Love is in the Air. And then the call, which is associated to the solicitor, unfolds into a list of injunctions, building what I call the sentence of the ethos. And I gave the example of the sentence of love, which we may regard as the tables of the law of the ethos of love. The ethos is the first geographical group of co-requested people. And I insisted that it doesn't have to be a community. So to share concern for these tables of the law, which are spelled out in the sentence, is how we stick to the local meaning of love, which doesn't coincide with any extensional meaning. So I wanted to insist on that because maybe I was not clear enough last time. If you take the example of love, you have two things. You have what you could define as the meaning of love in language. And I would say that love is a feeling, for example. I would describe love as a feeling with such and such properties. And then you have the tables of the law of the call, which is associated to the word love as it circulates in our shared language. And I think the two things are completely different. The meaning, which is going to be the local meaning of the ethos of love, is not the same as the meaning which may be associated to the word love in the language. Although the meaning we are defining by making explicit these tables of the law derives in a complicated way from the meaning of the word love, or at least we have to presuppose the meaning of the word love. But then it's not the same meaning. What dictionaries tell us is usually the extensional meaning. And I insisted also that local meanings, which determine districts of culture, they bring at the same time infinite paths. Which means that we have to interpret in any situation what we should do in a concrete way in order to satisfy the sentence. So it's not enough to know the injunctions. There is always a big problem of how to apply them. For example, how do you apply the injunction?
Sorry.
Hi. So how do you apply the injunction? Make love the totality of your life. How do we do that? I took the examples of Paris, Texas, and the character of the hero who says that it was a great relationship because with that woman, it was incredible to do shopping together. So for him, he describes doing shopping together as a way to answer to the injunction of making love the totality of our lives. But there are other ways, and it's difficult to define. There is something to interpret, and there is something to find in any situation. And we know that this task to interpret in any situation which is the correct way, the best way to satisfy the senses, it has no end. We know in advance, doing that job, that it's not going to be closed by any behavior we are able to have at some point of time. And finally, I compared the attitude of Etho Analysis with the vision of culture, seeing mostly the world of the collere. And I said that apparently Etho Analysis focuses on another part of culture, not the actual part of which symbolic objects have been produced, but rather the complementary part of what demands can we hear, what calls can we hear, thanks to culture. And I said that there is no absolute contradiction between both approaches, because in human things, nothing is completely deprived of a kind of normative aura, which means that anything, any cultural data we are able to find in the description of the world of the collere probably enfolds some vectorization, witnesses for some call. And so in another sense, to have the Etho Analysis approach is a way to enrich the approach which limits itself to the archaeology of our data.
Mm-hmm.
So now I come to the last part of this third chapter, which is back to mathematics.
Oh, good. I was waiting for that.
At first, it was not included, but then I thought I had to do it. Because, and so the idea is that, can I relate in any way this perspective on culture with the philosophy of mathematics, which I formulated before in this seminar? And in order to give an honest answer, I have to say more about Etho Analysis, and I am going to do it step by step. For starters, I do not directly apply Etho Analysis to philosophy of mathematics, and I'm going to explain why. It's basically because I don't regard mathematics as an ethos. But first point, I have to say that I recognize truth as a sollicitator. So in my view, there is an ethos of truth, which is important for Etho Analysis. I even argued that it had been understood in that way by philosophy, but not all the time. Because, for example, there are two big counterexamples, which are Hegel on the one hand and Heidegger on the other hand. Because Hegel, he introduces a new use of the word truth, and he says things of following kind. He says that the truth of the child is the adult. So there are other examples. The truth of, I don't know how to say it. You know what? And then it's going to be the butterfly, but I don't know how to say in English.
Tell it in French.
Le germe ou le ver, je sais pas.
Le germe.
Je sais même pas en français. I don't know even know it in French because I'm so bad in with animals. So, but
Which animal?
The butterfly is first something.
A larva.
Yes,
a larva.
A larva.
Yeah.
The true of the larva is the butterfly.
Yeah, exactly. I
think this is just a way of speaking, or do you think that is actually what Hegel understood?
It's coherent with everything Hegel says, because truth is always something which is recovered and asserted in the becoming, inside becoming. So
I would say it the other way around, actually. The truth of the adult is the child.
The truth
of the adult is the child. That's what I would say.
The truth of the
adult is the child.
Yeah, okay.
It seems much more plausible to me.
Also, I think it's a different approach, but it's rather another genealogical approach. Hegel is also genealogical, but for him, the genealogy is always best expressed in the result. He has a kind of principle of the result.
Historical, and the history is essential towards the telos. So the history has a telos. Yeah. So the truth of the history is the telos that it has.
So that's the.
It's correct what I said.
Yeah, it's correct. So then in Hegel, truth is the process of being, always. The always resulting process of being, one could say. But in Heidegger, in the famous lecture, which is on the essence of truth, he sustains that truth is the disclosure of being. It's the event of the disclosure of being. And, in the beginning, he says that both meanings, the meaning of authenticity and the meaning of truth of a proposition, they are both about conformity. But he wants to reverse our understanding of truth and to make it about the very fact that being discloses itself to us.
So say again. So for Heidegger, truth is what?
He relies on the Greek aletheia, which is almost exactly disclosure.
Disclosure. Okay. So truth is disclosure.
Yes, and so truth has to be related to the event of being. Being discloses itself, and it offers us something, and this something is it's given in a kind of openness, and this allows us to say propositions which are going to be true about it. But for him, the precondition, which is the disclosure of beings by being, is the most important thing.
So the famous lecture in which you distinguish different senses of truth by Plato and Aristotle, one as conformity and the other as authenticity in some sense.
So authenticity, he says, it's the same. It's again conformity.
So Plato and Aristotle are the same.
Yes, for him, and we have to come back.
So I know only the first part of the lecture. I don't know the second. So in the second, he contributes to them the idea of disclosure.
Yeah.
But what is the difference with Plato then? With authenticity, what is the difference?
I don't know. For him, Plato, but he reads Plato in a Heideggerian way. So for him, Plato has seen that there is a disclosure, but he attributes the disclosure to the idea.
Okay.
That's his reading of Plato.
And what we should do?
No, we should understand disclosure as purely event, but also Eignung.
So there is no conformity to the idea. There is the fundamental truth of the event.
Yes. Truth is the correct word for describing something which is internal to being and which is disclosure.
Okay.
And so in both cases, in the Hegel case and in the Heidegger case, you see that you have a conception of truth where you lose what I would call the interval of truth. So truth is not anymore a relation between something and some part of being, but it's internal to being. Truth is either the process, which is the central affair of being, or the event, which is again the central feature of being. Being discloses itself.
So is this still Heidegger, what you're saying here?
I say both Hegel and Heidegger, they have an ontological reading of truth. They see truth as part of being in a way.
But they are two different readings, two ontological but different. You do not reduce one to the other.
No, I completely agree to that.
Okay.
So,
because the truth of Hegel is the truth of history, the truth of Heidegger is the truth of the particular event. They are completely different perspectives, correct?
Yeah. But
for one time, I'm not criticizing you. I try to understand.
Yeah. I admire it. But
what you say?
He admires it.
So I insisted that this is an ontological reading of truth. But then so for me, truth is a solicitor, and I mentioned many reasons for that in the book where I treated Etho Analysis of truth. Even
so which book is that again?
Partage du sens, Sharings of Sense. And I enlisted 6 injunctions building the sentence of truth. So there is an ethos of truth, and there is a sentence of truth. So what are these 6 injunctions? First, we have the 2 metaphysical injunctions. And these injunctions are here to secure that we respect the interval of truth, which means that we are not going to accept any ontological reduction of truth. So truth has to be a relation, thing and something else. And the first injunction is the injunction of strangeness. Recognize the strangeness of being. I think in truth, it's extremely important to treat being as something which is a priori strange. We don't know in advance that being is going to be what we expect it to be because of our needs, because of our desires, because of our moods, and so on. And the first guy who said it in a very explicit and clear way was Galileo, because there is a famous quote of Galileo where he speaks about the inexorability of nature, meaning exactly that nature doesn't have to fit with our needs, desires, and so on.
What is that word?
Inexorability. Inexorable. I took it that it exists in English.
Yeah, inexorable. Yeah.
Inexorable.
Yeah, it's not a
very common word.
Inescapable. Okay.
You could try irreducible, but I think that inexorable, it's exactly the meaning. It's something you cannot move. And then Lenin is the second name.
Galileo and Lenin in the same.
Because when we were young, there was a book which was very important for any leftist epistemologist, and you could not be an epistemologist without being a leftist epistemologist in France at the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. And this book of Lenin was Materialism and Empirical Criticism.
It's a criticism to it's a fantastic book. It's a criticism to the Vienna Circle.
Yeah.
So materialism and
empirical criticism.
Empirical criticism
is his name for the Vienna Circle.
Oh.
So it's a philosophical, very deep analysis and criticism.
So he insists that materialism means that keep the position of being as strange. We don't claim to attack it or to diminish it.
Imperial criticism is because it's precedent to the real constitution of the Vienna Circle. So it's a criticism to sleek, to sleek position in philosophy of science. It's a fantastic book. I remember that when I was teaching logical positivism, I asked it to my student.
Yeah,
it's really a very good philosophical book.
It could be. but then just I wanted to remember that he was insisting on this point, which is, as a matter of fact, important. The tradition. First thing that we are asked for is to recognize the strangeness of being. And then there is Levinas, and I am going to use a quote which I already told to Ben, which is a quote from Totality and Infinity, and he says, without separation, there would not have been truth, only being. So he insists that in order to have a strangeness of being, we should stop from believing that any categorization of ours, any discourse of ours is being and covers this strangeness. And we need, for having truth to be something different than being, we need separation. And that's the point which Levinas insists. The second injunction, which is again about this interval of truth, is the injunction of separation, which means that we have to accept that we face strangeness of being from the separated position of our language. So our language in knowledge counts as something different from being. And that's the way we may have truth. Truth of our propositions about strange being. And then this language, I think that in the Levinasian perspective I am trying to introduce, language has here to be understood as otherwise than being, at least for the reason, at least because language is ideal. That's what Husserl insisted upon, which is that any constituent of language, of the shared language, is a symbolic datum able to be repeated, which means that what we call a letter, it's an ideal type over any occurrence of this letter. What we call a word is an ideal type over any occurrence of this word, and so on. Same with proposition. And you remember that when I was describing for you the Platonician cone of ideality, I insisted that there is no place for the idea inside ontology, because the idea has to be presented only in its occurrences, in its cases, and at the same time it's other than any of these cases. So it makes the location of the idea within being impossible. So in that sense, the fact that language participates ideality witnesses the conception that language is otherwise than being. So, and then we have the two epistemological injunctions, which are first the injunction of welcoming, which means that we have to welcome the strangeness of that which has to be known. So it's extremely difficult because we here means the otherwise than being of language. And so how could the otherwise than being of language welcome strangeness of being? It looks like impossible, metaphysically impossible. But how we behave and make it give some content to this injunction is that we are taking inexorable nature as a master of study. So we are treating this strange being as a master of study. That's the behavior of any science. So we try to understand, it means we try to explain, we try to extract some meaning about the regularities of the strange being. And then there is the injunction of identity, And it tells that we have to produce some identity because what was welcome, because following the third injunction, there is a way of internalizing strange being. For example, in the Vienna Circle, the way of internalizing strange being seems to stand at the level of the protocol statements. Because protocol statements, they are part of language and they witness strange being.
Sorry, Jean-Michel, I understand that what is strangeness, separation, welcoming, identity, and possible also commitment, transcontextuality. It's difficult for me to understand what is injunction. In which sense? You speak in sense of the Etho Analysis? Is the address?
It's the sentence. No, there is the reading of meaning, which is a reading of meaning where we regard the central, the main circumstance of meaning as the address. Some message incomes, there is an incoming message and it demands me. And then there is the idea that we share meaning, and this sharing of meaning builds a district of culture. And this meaning we share, it comes through a sollicitator, which is a word, one of the words of a shared language, but this word cannot be reduced to its extensional function. So this word also conveys a call. And then there is what I define as the sentence of the ethos, which is the list of injunctions which unfold the call of the sollicitator. So for example, the list I gave last time was meant to unfold the call of love. The word love conveys a call, and we can detail this call in these 7 injunctions. And here, these injunctions are spell out the call of truth. Truth is again a call, and I express it by these injunctions. So what we share is that we have to relate to these injunctions. And as followers of the ethos of the sollicitator of truth, we should observe these injunctions.
So can you also say something again about these protocol statements? I don't know that.
You know, they say that science is always made out of scientific theories, and these scientific theories are more or less first-order theories. And we adjust them with protocol statements, which are the results of our experiences. We are doing experiments, and these experiments are always translated into protocol statements.
And the protocol statements are written in this first-order language of the theory, or what's the relationship?
That's the big issue which was discussed. But in the best version, in Neurath's version, they are written in the language of this first-order theory.
Right.
But then Carnap was more or less suggesting in some passages that it would have to be written in a phenomenological language. And so in Neurath was saying that if we follow that, then we cannot explain how scientific theories improve, because they improve in the Popperian way when we find a conclusion of the theory which is contradicted by a protocol statement. So it has to be the same language for us to be able to record this contradiction. So it was the debate between Neurath and Carnap.
In the Vienna Circle.
Yes. They wrote a small pedagogical book about philosophy of science. Some friends of us, Anouk Barberousse and Pascal Ludwig and Max Kistler, And they insist very much on this debate at the beginning of the book. So, and then we have two pragmatic injunctions. The first injunction, I call it injunction of commitment, which means that we have to assume our commitment to truth, which means that we have, when we say something, we have to assume that this thing we said claims to be true first, and it also alludes to a possible verification. And it's funny because it's exactly what Giovanni Semmin said, defining what he calls proposition. He defines propositions by this injunction of commitment. And then we have the injunction of transcontextuality, which means that as much it is true that anything we are able to say has to be put in some context, because in order to understand exactly what we mean when we say something, usually there is a context to consider. Still, if we understand clearly the force of asserting, then behind any contextualizations, there is an assertion which is uttered beyond any context. It's part of the sentence of truth that we have to reach behind any contextualization of any statement, the transcontextual statement, which is always involved. So I take an example. If I say that Peter is arrogant and irritable, maybe there is a lot of context to put in what I said, because maybe my nation is important in how I use that kind of sentence. Or,
You're meaning Peter Gibson, the poor one?
No,
What
We don't have
Peter
to know.
did to you?
We
don't
That's
have to know.
context. That's context.
Well, we don't have to know, right?
No,
To
no,
understand that
poor
example.
Peter.
you're introducing the Chapman context.
Yeah.
Poor
And
Peter.
then there is, you try to say that we have to use a personal context. How do I usually use arrogant and irritable? But then I have said something, and I have said something which is said as beyond any of these contexts, even if the best way to read is to use by saying it, I said it. Say more in a way. And then, so these are the 6 injunctions. And in the book, I tried to show that epistemology of basic disciplines of science more or less followed such sentence. Because if you listen to what is said in the usual epistemology of the basic disciplines of science, you are going to realize that this epistemology is just a way to accommodate special versions adapted to the local, the particular science we are dealing with of these 6 requirements.
It's relevant that there is not truth between the requirement.
What?
There is no truth between the requirement.
Between?
The 6 requirements do not include a requirement of truth.
Well, they are spelling out what is asked from us by truth.
So according to you, truth is the conjunction of the 6 requirements.
Yeah, if following these 6 injunctions is our way of being a follower of the ethos of truth, of trying to level up with the requirement of truth. So another important point is that I do not regard science as an ethos. I said that mathematics is not an ethos for me, but even science is not an ethos. I think science is not a solicitor. I think we don't have a contingent tradition answering a call enclosed in the word science. Science, I see it rather as an institutionalization of the pursuit of truth. Truth is the solicitor, not science.
But don't you think people are using the word science as a solicitor? When they say things like follow the science?
Yeah, but we also feel always uncomfortable. At least it makes me feel uncomfortable when I hear that.
Exactly. That's why I'm raising this question.
Right.
And that's why I said it that way. People, I think, are using it that way.
So
They're invoking it as if it's a
at least they may use it that way. Then science is about keeping scientific mind. So then it's treated as a contingent tradition. Science could disappear.
Yeah. And I think people are trying to use it that way. And you're right, it makes me uncomfortable too, but I think it's happening.
So I understand that people are doing that. And even I could say that mathematics within science now is concerned by keeping on with mathematics. Mathematics has become concerned with saving mathematics as a tradition. And it makes sense because there are around other disciplines which threaten mathematics, which are physics, computer science, and logic, in a way.
I think it's going the other way around. So.
Okay, good. No, I'm okay with
because like programming becomes like, I mean, the activity of programming, for example, like writing code, becomes like thanks to AI kind of more trivial, but kind of conceptualizing, understanding the code you want to write, that becomes more of a challenge now. And I don't think you can do that without mathematics. So I think kind of maybe we're just inverting the relationship between computer science and mathematics.
I would agree with that, but I think then you have to be a philosopher of mathematics and argue that you need the conceptual generality of mathematics in order to grasp correctly code, for example. I just wanted to think that it has become part of mathematics to worry for the identity of mathematics. And for me, to worry for the identity of mathematics is mainly the task of philosophy of mathematics.
So to worry for the identity worry for the identity of mathematics, what is this? To say, no, you are not a mathematician, Alex, you are a computer science. So please go out from here. Is this the identity of mathematics?
No, I try to think the identity of mathematics.
But in this sense, that they defend against
I think
external people, these people that pretend to be mathematicians. What does it mean?
No, I think.
Sorry,
I cannot make a complete clarity about that. I remind you that in 2022, I was defining philosophy of mathematics as an effort to think the identity of mathematics. And so that's why I was defining the 5 questions. Then you may ask, what does identity of mathematics mean? In a way, it should not mean exactly the identity of mathematicians.
Okay.
But
so what do you want to? Okay,
it's more the identity.
What make mathematics mathematics?
Yes.
Okay.
So and I found that even Shapiro was defining philosophy of mathematics exactly that.
Exactly.
Sorry, exactly what?
As an effort to think the identity of mathematics. Which I accept completely Marco's translation, which is what makes mathematics mathematics. And I think in order to answer that, the best way is to answer the 5 questions I had listed. But then another argument. My claim is that truth is the authentic solicitor, not science, not mathematics. Even if I understand that culturally, it may happen, sciences, and especially mathematics, feel responsible for their identity nowadays. But then another argument is that every science appears as dominated by its object. So in science, it's not about keeping on with the scientific tradition, it's about respecting the object. We have objects because we are inside some science. So we are dealing with objects, and we have to describe them in a true way. And it means that we have to be faithful to truth. And it means for every particular science that we have to understand any scientific truth as dictated by its object. You find that in texts. And science contribution as an institution amounts to creating the best conditions for the pursuit of objective truth, which is truth dictated by the object. So I think it's rather clear that in any science, it is about respecting the object, not about keeping on with science.
Yes, but what's the object of mathematics?
Yeah.
The problem is that the object of physics is external. The object of mathematics is in some sense internal.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to respect the object? Is to respect the identity?
No, I was speaking of not of mathematics.
Ah, okay.
But I agree that there is this specific. So again, it doesn't make sense to apply directly Etho Analysis to mathematics. Considering what I had just considered, mathematics is not an ethos. Truth is the ethos. So we have to explain the epistemology of mathematics in the line of the ethos of truth. So we have to understand how philosophy is able to define a local version of the 6 injunctions for mathematics. That's what I do in the book. So, but there is more to the issue, because even if mathematics or science are not ethoses, we have to think of mathematics in the context of a culture, sheltering several contingent traditions, several ethoses, including the ethos of truth. So we cannot think of mathematics without including mathematics in culture. And inside culture, there are a lot of ethoses. That's the heterogeneity of culture. So, and my claim is that the 3 fundamental attitudes towards the mathematical object that I chose to describe in the philosophy of mathematics part of these lectures, they are correlated with a vision of surrounding culture and of mathematics within it. So I'm going to come back to my 3 attitudes. But I think before doing that, I can say that that much is true. If the description of the fundamental attitude are at the same time a way of locating mathematics within surrounding culture, it witnesses that philosophy of mathematics, for that precise reason, is always at the same time general philosophy. It cannot but express a more general philosophical content, because what we say in philosophy of mathematics is going to help us to understand how mathematics is located within the larger spectrum of culture. But it means that we have to consider philosophy of mathematics in the context of an accompanying reflection of culture. So now I come back to the 3 attitudes. The first one was seeing the object as child of truth. So as I already said, as I understand it, it's linked with a vision of reason as the subject of science. So behind this idea of understanding the object as child of truth, there is the vision of reason as the subject of science. And also there is the vision that the core of reason is the logical inhabitation of truth. I'm speaking about logical inhabitation of truth because it's very clear that for this point of view, we are not only knowledgeable, we know, it's not only that we know logic, it's that logic has an obviousness to us. And this obviousness is our inhabitation of truth, which is logical. Then the idea is not only that mathematics is going to be assimilated with logic, which is what logicism does, but it's also that any subdisciplines of science come to unity along the logical paradigm. So the general perspective is that we see reason as the subject of science. We want to look at science as always witnessing reason, as always showing reason as its main character, as its main author, its main hero. And also it means that the only possible unity between all sciences is the logical unity. So some analytic philosophers, but not all of them and not all in the same way, I have to say, if I want to be honest, have endorsed such perspective. And they liked the way this perspective was presenting culture. It was presenting culture in a strict rationalist way. So I have always the feeling that when I read an analytic account of some part of culture, that what they think, the philosophers who I am reading, what they mean is that if there is anything valuable in this part of culture, there is some logical content which I'm going to recover. There must be some logical content which I'm going to recover. And if I don't find any logical content, then there was nothing in it. It was just...
That's, I do not understand, really I do not understand. Because logic is not there. Logic is the way in which I reconstruct. I ascribe a logic. So in what sense there is a logical content? There is logical content. This table is on the right of the other table, so I use a logical statement. I use a logical form of predication to say that, but there is no logic in the table.
Yeah, I understand what you are saying now, and I think it's a weaker way of saying the same. But I think a lot of people, they really think that if you look carefully at aesthetics, you are going to find some logic machinery which is working within. So on. If you are looking correctly at politics, you are going to find a logical machinery which is working within politics. So I'm okay. Your formulation, your formulation is nicer. So then you say it's not that logic really inhabits anything in culture. It's only that we can provide a logical reconstruction of anything, which is already a great thing to say. It's already a heavy assertion.
Absolutely a great thing to say, but it's another thing.
But I think that usually there is more. But I'm happy with the distinction. Thank you for the distinction.
So what distinction?
Distinction between seeing a logical machinery working within any part of culture and claiming that there is a logical reconstruction of any part of culture. But then if you, my problem with that kind of vision is that it seems to me that it doesn't do justice to the heterogeneity of culture. It seems to be okay with reducing to logical standard anything in human experience, and I think that who are in favor of that attitude, they are going to tell me that we cannot avoid that because everything which is meaningful is connected with the logical structure of a proposition. So if anything in culture is meaningful, then it has to be reducible to a logical standard. I understand that. I wanted to describe this way. Now I come to the second attitude, which is looking at object, at the mathematical object, and seeing it as an object which has been presented. And to take the mathematical object as presented, it's exactly what Husserl's phenomenological approach has wanted to do. And Husserl was convinced that any mathematical method would be rooted in how objects got presented. And he thought that for every science. And he thought even more than that. He thought that tracing back the sophisticated and complicated results of science to their grounds in our Erlebnisse, that it was the right way for reinserting objective exact science into the space of culture. So in his late texts, in The Origin of Geometry, and more even in the Vienna lecture, he's dissatisfied with the feeling that exact science has parted from culture, that people don't see exact science as part of culture. And he wanted to save science for culture. And he thought that the foundational way was the right way, that if we make explicit how anything which is said in our science connects to its foundation in our Erlebnisse, then we are going to connect exact science with our more elementary experiences, and then we are going to reinsert science in culture. For Husserl, it was at the same time a way to save rationalism, because elaborating the foundations, going back to what he called life world, it was enough for restoring the rational unity of culture. And for it was this foundational path. It was a way to reconnect the brightest results of science with common feeling and language. Here I'm more or less describing the Husserl, the last Husserl, the Husserl of the crisis. And so by this foundational connection, he thought that rationality became shareable, that everybody could share rationality, which is a big program, which I think a lot of people have had in mind. How can we do for quantum physics to become shareable? We don't have good answers to that, I think. But Husserl, at the same way, at the same time, he thought, one can say that he considered heterogeneity of culture in his own way, because he was taking into account the diversity of presentation, because there is one typical presentation for every object region in Husserl's language. For example, he describes what is the basic presentation of other persons. Also, he describes what is the presentation of durations and of time more generally. What is the presentation of usual objects like the tree in the garden? What is the presentation of history as a discipline or as a dimension? So he was considering heterogeneity, at least in this minimal way, by considering a diversity of presentation modes. But then it's true that at the same time he was unifying culture at the transcendental level, because the connection between sophisticated results of any part of culture to our basic Erlebnisse was always a foundational one. And so the transcendental perspective was a way of unifying culture. It was a way of seeing the specificity of parts of culture, but at the same time, it was also a unifying way. Then I come to object as showing difference without concept. So that the third attitude, it retains that a mathematical object usually comes in multiplicities, showing difference without concept. So, as I reminded you, mathematics takes up the old Platonician ideal cone, and it manages to build a coherent discourse dealing with ideal objects. So we are going to have objects which have this strange status of being cases of idealities. But we are also going to deal with difference without concept. The last version of an attempt to deal with difference without concept being probably homotopy type theory. In the case of constructive objectivity, objects tolerate difference without concept exactly because they are occurrences of Platonician ideas. So in the case of constructive objectivities, the two are the same. To allow for difference without concepts and to be case occurrences of Platonician ideas is exactly the same and for the same reasons. So what is the corresponding global vision of culture? I think it's based on the ideality of symbols. The vision, the vision of culture, which is spontaneously associated to this vision of the mathematical object as allowing difference without concepts, is that cultural sediments are strings of symbols, and strings of symbols always allow repetition, hence difference without concept. So this is, we come to the structuralist vision of culture, which interprets the colere as elaboration of texts. So that's the vision which was very famous at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s in France at least, which was that culture is elaboration of text. We can approach anything in culture by considering the good texts. Anything which is a district of culture, there is a class of texts which illustrates it. And what is the heterogeneity of culture? It's the heterogeneity of rules or stakes when dealing with symbols. So there are a lot of languages. So it boils down to heterogeneity of language games, one could say, which was exactly the vision of Lyotard in his The Different. He was seeing the plurality of culture as a plurality of language games. So here are my final words. I think that the perspective revealing the three attitudes is strongly connected with the philosophy of culture approach. I think it's because I was concerned by mathematics as a region of culture that I came to consider these three attitudes and that I came to organize the discussion around them. So because I had always in mind the specificity of the mathematics within a larger culture. And I have wanted to connect this specificity either with a way of introducing the basic objects. So that's the two first attitudes. Either you introduce the object as child of truth, or you introduce the object as having been presented. Or you see the specificity of mathematics at the level of a local exceptional metaphysics of the multiple, which is allowing difference without concepts. I think that's how the three attitudes arose in my approach. So here is the end, which means that I came to the end not only of this chapter, but of these Chapman lectures, and I realized that I gave here 20 lectures. So I feel extremely guilty to have inflicted you so many lectures, but now it's finished.
This was really great.